Hello everyone, welcome back to the SevereMMA YouTube channel. Today I am joined by Teddy Stringer. Teddy is moving over from his amateur career to his pro career, taking part in a Cage Warriors sponsored MMA Fight Academy show. We talk about a ton of things in this interview, from his amateur career, the way he approaches fighting, the whiteboard of dreams, what books he's listening to at the moment. And all of that includes, obviously, the conversation about MMA Fight Academy. Thanks very much to Teddy for his time, and I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, please feel free to click like and click subscribe on the SevereMMA YouTube channel. It really helps us grow the platform and get more videos that you like to you. Cheers. One thing I've noticed about your fighting style, but also your reaction post-win or post-loss, is that there is a calm to you, a collectedness, almost an assurance, a level of composure that I think is beyond not just your actual physical age, but your fighting years. Where does that come from?
Firstly, I'll take that as a compliment right there. I think a lot of that comes from the fact I'm 22 years old. I've had 23 amateur fights, so I've had more fights than I've had years on this planet. So I've been around the block. I've seen some things in the cage. So perhaps not in my first couple fights, but I've certainly honed in on being a very calm person when I'm in there. And I think it was always a trait that I had inside me, especially knowing how hard I train and how professional I've trained throughout my whole amateur career. When I walk into that cage, I've just got stellar confidence and just feel unbeatable because I put in professional level work as an amateur and now going to a professional scene.
So you mentioned you've had more amateur fights than you've had years on this planet, and that you've honed that calm, collected assurance. Like, you also mentioned that it's sort of a part of you anyway. How do you combine those two things together? How do you combine the person outside of the cage that has these calm elements to him with the chaotic situation that is a fight?
It's a tricky question. It's something I'm still trying to put the finger on myself, but it's certainly something that I've grown with, and I've had both sides to it. I've walked out to the cage with not a single nerve going through my body, and I'm too calm, too cold with it. So once you fight and you realize that level of excitement and calmness is there, that's perfect. You've got to be nervous but calm at the same time, which is a weird thing to say out loud, but when you feel it inside, you know you've hit it there. And thankfully, I think my personality leans towards just a very calm, chilled guy, regardless of the situation.
So I guess there's a question to ask there, right? Fighting in itself, yes, there are technical aspects to it. There are transitions that you can see and understand, but in certain transitions, in certain moments, it's an extremely chaotic environment. What led you, as a man, as a person that is calm, what led you into the love of MMA, that love of chaos?
I just knew from when I started training that this was for me. It's chaotic, like you say, but it's beautiful violence. People talk about that, and I think that hits the nail on the head. There's scrambles and chaos and a mixture of emotions involved with fighting, but just knowing that you'll never be able to master it. It's a sport that will never be completed. Knowing that it's a mental and physical battle the whole time in there, that's something that just kind of really fascinates me and has got me involved in this sport.
Could you put your finger on as to why the mental and physical battle intrigues you the most?
It's the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. It's anyone who's fought at a high level understands the sacrifice in the gym, the emotions on fight night, the fact that you're going out there to fight someone who's been training to beat you for 12 weeks. It's such a hard sport. So I think that's why all the mental and physical side of it is just, it's something so hard that it's fascinating.
Yeah, there's almost an elixir to the payoff, right? There's a build. If you get a full 12-week camp, fantastic. But there's a build of that 12 weeks, of that time where you're garnering emotion, you're almost building energy whilst you're outlaying so much in the gym, so that when you get to fight night, if you do, as you say, find that flow state, if you will, of being in balance, of nervous but calm, if you get your hand raised, it's a different level of emotional release, right?
Yeah, undoubtedly that feeling of winning is uncomparable to anything. The emotions that go through your body, it beats any drug on this planet, and it's just unrivaled.
So I want to talk a little bit about your amateur career. Not necessarily the records or who you've fought necessarily, but from an overarching perspective, in your opinion, as a man that's now sort of leaving his amateur career behind, and we'll talk about the opportunities to go pro in a bit, but what is an amateur career for you?
I think an amateur career should be like boxing. The level of boxing at amateur is ridiculous. You see them competing in the Olympics as amateurs, and I feel like MMA needs more of that. It's learning. It's a place where you can lose. It's a place where you can make mistakes. It's a place where, like I mentioned earlier, you can go into a fight too calm. You can go into a fight too nervous, and you're just figuring all that shit out whilst you're doing it. So for me, that's what amateur is. And by no means, by me saying I'm turning professional, means I've figured it all out. But now I'm in a place where I'm on top of all of those little questions that I've had. I'm in a good place with it all. So for me, amateur is about learning.
And what's your opinion on sort of the landscape of amateur, I think, changing over the last sort of 5 to 6 years, where there's more investment in the idea of amateur belts. There's amateur fighters looking for sponsorships. There's amateur fighters looking for these, almost treating it like professional. They're picking opponents to sort of keep their amateur record looking stellar. They are making sure that they are navigating the system in a way that maybe doesn't predicate to learning in the best way.
Yeah, like obviously the growth of the amateur scene is something amazing. IMMAF, the fact that you can get regional belts and the shows have that professional feel, amazing. But when we're talking about people picking opponents and just that kind of, when people are treating amateur like professional, I hate that. Like, you have to understand that it's amateur. It is crazy. I see some people like saying, "Oh, I'm 5-0 as an amateur, undefeated. I'm going to go and take the professional scene by storm." You know absolutely nothing. You've had 5 fights. That is such a fresh state to be in. And yeah, just that mindset in amateur frustrates me, but everyone's going to make their own decisions. And I think I've made the best decision for myself with my amateur career, and other people will do their thing.
Yeah, and on the topic of the shows becoming more professional, having belts, having titles, whatever, all of these things are potential distractions to the ego, right? As a man that self-proclaimed is somebody that's trying to find balance between the calm and the chaos, how do you allow your ideology of amateur being purely for amateur reasons, how do you allow that to win over the idea that there's fans at an amateur show that are screaming your name and that there's a belt on the line and there's all these potential, social media interactions afterwards? How do you go into it? Obviously wanting to win, right? I'm not saying you're ever going into a fight with the objective of losing, but going in there with the understanding that if you do lose, this is amateur and this is a learning experience over anything else. How does that combine with these shows almost feeling like a professional event?
It's difficult because I'm a very competitive person. I hate losing, but I've also I'm kind of at peace with losing. I understand it's part of life. So when the shows have that professional feel about them, you kind of think it allows you to think it's a bigger deal than what it is. But I think that's a good element because this is a rehearsal for our pro careers. So we've just got to, as amateurs, soak all that in and not let that influence the way you fight too much.
You mentioned there that you understand that losing is a part of life. That's an extremely wise thing for a 22-year-old man to say. Where do you learn that? Do you learn that from MMA? Do you learn that from somewhere else? Where does that come from?
I'm someone who's trying to get the little 10% outside of the gym. So MMA's taught me a lot, but I'm reading books, I'm listening to podcasts. I'm really trying to go and grow my mindset and stuff, because if you'd have spoke to me 3-4 years ago when I first started to get into competing, I 100% did not have that mindset. But you hone in on that as you get older. And I mean, I'm sure if I listen back to this interview in 10 years' time, I think I'm chatting a load of shit. But it's something with growing and experience that I've learned.
So tell me some of the books you're reading. Tell me, what's the podcast routine? Do you have a weekly podcast routine? What's going in your ears at the minute?
Well, at the minute, I'm currently listening to an audiobook, David Goggins. It's his second book. I've completely forgot the title now. It's not Can't Hurt Me. It's Never Back Down, I think it's called. Or Never Finish, sorry. Never Finish by David Goggins is the audiobook that I'm listening to at the moment. And then a whole lot of Ryan Holiday books have been influential towards me. And that's talking about the stoic philosophies in life. So that's some things that kind of help me hone in on this mindset for an MMA fighter.
And you mentioned David Goggins. I think he's an extremely popular man,
Yeah.
both within the male community, but also within the martial arts community. Like, what are the main things that you take from him and take from his story?
Do you know, my favorite thing about David Goggins is just that ruthless work rate. You know, when you see someone who's had shit in their past and they use that to motivate them and fuel their energy, and that's something that I really look at and I'm inspired by. By no means am I saying that I've had a shit life. I've had quite a nice life, but I use any bit of fuel that I can, or just the fact that I see him using that as fuel is enough to make me kind of understand that side of, you've just got to put the work in regardless of the situation.
Yeah, I mean that's an extremely wise take for such a young man. But like,
Yeah.
I want to make a slight transition, and that's to the whiteboard. Right now, I watched your IMMAF run, the European Championships, and also the Worlds when you lost in the final to Gitanov. But in one of those interviews, you mentioned that on your whiteboard was a set of goals. Do we still use the whiteboard? If so, what's on the whiteboard?
I can see the whiteboard right now. That's good research from you there. But on the whiteboard, at the start of the year, I had some goals, but a few things have changed, and the goals have changed actually already this year. But right now, it is to win the MMA Fight Academy, which is a show that I'm taking part of, and to win my professional debut. That is what's on the whiteboard right now.
And outside of making large goals, because let's be honest, that's quite a large goal, do you set yourself incremental goals? Do you set yourself short-term goals? I want to deep dive on this whiteboard. I love the idea of the whiteboard.
Yeah, there's stuff on there that's not even that related to fighting. So, like, one of my goals is to breathe better. Like, breathing and using breathing techniques is something that I've been trying to work on more this year. So that's something that I've been doing, and like it's not something that I've mastered, but the book Atomic Habits talks about like doing things like, if you just do something for 2 minutes a day, it can create a habit. So from the start of this year, I just started doing breathing exercises for 2 minutes a day, and now all of a sudden breathing's become part of my routine. and I'm pushing more and more with my breath work and stuff. So there's goals on that whiteboard that are unrelated to fighting, that are broken down into small things like just do 2 minutes of breathing a day. But yeah, it's a mad old whiteboard.
I mean, in the way that the constant battle between chaos and calm in a fight and the mental and physical battles in a fight fascinate you, the stuff that's on that whiteboard that's not MMA related is what fascinates me, right? Because I think that it's easy to see who you are in the cage. It's easy to see who you are on the walkout when you embrace your coaches, the Instagram reels you put up, the posts you may put up. But I think that the thing that humanizes athletes is what happens behind that. It's the when you wake up and you say to yourself, I can't be fucking bothered to do this breath work. And yet David Goggins rings in your head and you do it anyway. Or when you pick up Atomic Habits, which again, I think is a massively influential book for many, many, many people. And you say, well, if I can turn this micro habit into a macro habit, what does that look like in 10 years? Right. And so I think the idea of a whiteboard, the idea of taking your goals and having a reminder where they're written out, right? I think the writing of the goal certainly solidifies it a little bit more than just having it internally. And you can have arguments with yourself internally and you can cheat yourself and say, it's fine, I'll do it whenever. But when you look up every day and you see the whiteboard, it's a reminder that there are tasks to complete, right?
100%. That is a massive thing you touched on there. Write shit down. People need to write shit down because that holds you accountable. You know, if it's a thought, it can float in and out of your mind. If something's written down, it's there. And if you don't do that, or if you kind of look back at it in 5 years' time and you think, oh, I wanted to do this and I completely just avoided it because it was hard, then you'll feel like a real bitch. So I think writing stuff down is great for the mind and it's great to hold yourself accountable.
So I want to talk a little bit about the IMMAFs, right? I've spoken to a number of amateur fighters over the last couple of months, and they've all sort of had a resounding opinion of the IMMAFs. But firstly, can I get your opinion on competing at multiple different IMMAFs and sort of how you found the process, how you found fighting multiple times in a very, very quick succession, making weight on multiple times? What your idea about was when you went to welterweight, like these sorts of things. What was your overall experience of the IMMAFs?
Yeah, so I've done 3 IMMAF competitions. I've done the World Championships as a junior in Bahrain. I've done the World Championships as a senior in Abu Dhabi. And then most recently, I did the European Championships as a senior in Italy. I love it. I think it's one of the best things for an amateur to do because the amount of experience in such a short amount of time is ridiculous. And the level of people that you're fighting, that is the top of amateur. So there's no easy fights. You follow the draw, you know. I've fought some ridiculously high level guys throughout the process. There's some elements to it that I find it's tricky, but like making weight every day, that's something that's quite difficult. And there's some Russian guys there, well, not in the past tournament, but there's Russian guys who will happily sit in the sauna and cut 4 or 5 kilos every single day. And then there's the English team, which are rightfully discouraging us from cutting weight. So hence why I moved up to welterweight to fight at IMMAF. And yeah, that has a big influence. And, you know, the whole process isn't perfect, but it's an amazing experience.
So we'll get to weight cutting. Weight cutting is something that I really despise in MMA, and we'll have a conversation about that shortly. But I wanted to touch on, and again, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but walking in against Gitinov with a pretty serious injury, what level of stoicism, what level of decision making does it take to walk in knowing that you're competing with a pretty serious injury and going in and competing anyway?
Yeah, that was a tricky fight because all week I've been saying that I wanted to fight him because he's the best, the pound for pound guy. So as soon as I won my first fight, I was chasing him. I was kind of hoping that he'd be in the draw for me tomorrow. But fighting him, I was already told that the medical team wouldn't clear me to fight if I got through into the final the next day. or the semi-final, sorry. So I kind of knew that I just had to go in there and give it absolutely everything that I had. I double wrapped my hand. I didn't wear a glove for the whole warm-up. We slipped a glove on about 2 minutes before we walked out and fought him. My hand was a balloon, as Conor McGregor would say. And yeah, it was one of those things where my mind was pretty clear. Ultimately, in the back of my head, I was hesitant to throw that right hand. And if you watch the fight back, I throw it maybe once or twice, and it's never with the intention to connect because my right hand was bust. But it was just good to go out there and challenge myself against the #1 amateur. And with a broken hand, I was happy with my performance out there. And yeah, I think the mental attitude was just leave it all in there because we've not got a fight tomorrow, regardless of the result. So no matter how injured I get, it's not a problem.
So then that, bearing in mind, we've just said amateur is for learning, right? One, what are the lessons that you take from that? And two, why take that risk? Right? Why go in there and be like, well, I can't fight tomorrow, win or lose. Why take that risk and potentially further injure the hand? Is it because you've wanted to fight Gitanov and here's the opportunity to fight him? Let's see what we can do against a guy like this with one hand. What are the learnings? Why take the risk?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I am a martial artist and I kind of consider myself as that kind of fighter, someone who's looking to perfect skill and win things technically, I've got that fighter in me. So as soon as I get the opportunity to fight the pound for pound best guy, I'm like, yeah, I'll beat him with one hand, no dramas. And of course, in hindsight, yeah, that was going to be a massive task to beat the pound for pound #1 amateur with a broken hand. But I thought I'm going to be on the sidelines after this anyway. So, and I would rather be on the sidelines thinking, right, I've done absolutely everything and I gave it up my all and I managed to beat the champ. Than being sat there thinking, oh, why did I pull out? So, you know, that was my thought process going into that. And it taught me some lessons. It certainly taught me that fighting in an IMMAF tournament, when you're mounted on someone, you don't throw your hands with no regard for the next day, because I was smashing my hands on this Irish kid's head and I just banged a hammer fist that was thrown at an awkward angle and shattered like one of the metacarpals in my hand. So yeah, that's something that I learned from that process.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a visceral lesson to take away, right? But
yeah,
if you were to take yourself out of your own experience, I guess, and if you were to review the man that walked in there knowing he had a busted right hand, did it teach you anything about yourself to go in there knowing that you were already injured and you were going to give it your best shot anyway? Did it teach you anything that you didn't know about yourself already?
It probably did. I might not be fully aware of what it taught me, but it probably did teach me a few things about myself. But yeah, it definitely showed me that dog and that fighter that I have got in me.
So I want to flip to the idea of welterweight, lightweight, weight cutting, that sort of thing. Before I give my opinion, what's your opinion both on weight cutting in the sport of MMA, but specifically weight cutting at amateur?
I hate weight cutting, but I also love it at the same time because it kind of it creates a fair way to fight people, because we all cut a similar amount of weight. As soon as you start to take that factor away, then some people are cutting weight and some people aren't, and that's a little bit tricky. But I think ultimately hydration tests and that sort of on the day weigh-in and multiple weight checks is the best way to control it, and that's what I'd love to see the sport going and be. I'd love to see lightweight fighters not weighing in at 155 pounds, but weighing in at 170 pounds instead, because nobody walks around at 155 and fights at 155. But I personally feel a lot better fighting at lightweight against people who are a similar size to me than I do fighting at welterweight.
So I'm not sure I agree that it makes a fair place for fighters to fight, because you'll get guys that will cut way more. You'll get guys that cut less. There'll be guys that will be able to cut more professionally than others. There's a lot of variables in the idea of it being fair. And I think for me, the fairest way, similar to what you've just said, I think the athletic commissions, both in the States, here, and globally, if they were funded correctly, I think the way to do it is randomized weigh-ins. So let's say I come to either Fourth Dimension or I come to Squad Jiu-Jitsu and I say, Teddy, jump on the scales for me. And I do that 9 times a year. If I see as an average over those 9 times a year that your weight is between, let's say, 170 and 172, right? Let's just say, right? Because some days you may eat more, some days you may eat less, you may be in the middle of a session, whatever it is, right? Well, then you're a 170-pound fighter. Or at max, you're a 165-pound fighter, right? And I think if we were able to do that across the board, I could say to you, okay, Teddy, in 12 weeks, you're going to weigh in at lightweight, quote unquote, and that's 160 pounds or 165 pounds. And so you may be out of camp. You're maybe not as shredded as you would be. Maybe you're not in as fight shape as you would be. Maybe, whatever, it's Christmas, you've had a good time, whatever it is. Like, I think that is a far fairer way. Now, the problems behind that are funding. The problems behind that are gym and athlete buy-in, right? It's taking away some of the autonomy of a fighter to have to be at a certain place at a certain time. And I understand that. But I feel like not only for professional fighters, where those weight cuts, I think, are far more drastic than a 170 to a 155, there are definitely guys in the UK that are cutting way more weight than that. But for amateur fighters, when, as you say, this is supposed to be a learning experience, I don't think that we should be promoting the idea of learning with a dehydrated brain. You know what I mean? Yeah,
sign me up for that. That is the best way. It's just how we make that possible. But even the idea of a weigh-in on a Friday and then stepping on the scales as you walk into the cage, then we can get a bit more accuracy on who's what weight and make it a bit fairer. But you're 100% correct. Like, amateur fighters doing the weight cut, okay, it teaches them how to cut the weight at pro. But other than that, it's just stupid. It's just sending fighters in dehydrated and not at peak performance. There's if you ask me to cut to 155 pounds, and then as soon as I cut to 155 pounds and fight, I would be fucking terrible. I would have not won a single fight in my life. It's not the peak thing for performance.
Right. And I feel like in an age, and maybe this will transition us nicely onto the next topic, and in an age where I don't think the UK amateur scene has been stronger, right? We have yourself now exiting the UK amateur scene. We have the likes of Marlon Jones, Curtis Campbell, George Staines, Liam McCracken, like a ton of names. And obviously there are guys in the English squad as well who are doing great. But there's a ton of names there that people know and care about. They're invested in their stories. They're invested in their fight careers, amateur or pro. I don't think we've ever had that level of strength in the UK amateur scene. And for us to be forcing these guys essentially to fluctuate their weight, and you say, oh, well, it teaches us to cut weight. I mean, when you listen to professional fighters that have fought professional for a long time, they'll tell you that the more that you cut weight, the harder it gets, right? And then, as you're saying, if I say to you, okay, Teddy, you're fighting at 155, and the moment you step off the scale at 155, you've got 6 minutes to get changed, put some gloves on, and you're in the cage. Like, it's just not the same thing. Like, being in and around that UK scene the UK scene that's never been more thriving. What has that done for your own skill acquisition?
Yeah, the level at amateur is so much higher. I think now you're seeing those amateurs who fought at that level starting to turn professional. Like you mentioned, Liam McCracken, you mentioned Curtis Campbell, who both had a couple pro fights now, and I know there's going to be big careers for a lot of these guys. And the level of amateur growing means people can stay amateur for longer, have more fights, and yeah, it certainly means that the skills that we're going to have as amateurs ahead of turning professional is going to be elite. And yeah, the people that are winning these IMMAF competitions are ready to be in big organizations. Like a lot of these people could walk into PFL or an early prelim on the UFC and probably hold their own. So yeah, I think the level of amateur rising is absolutely amazing, but we just need to do it in the healthiest way possible.
And do you feel like when you go and you watch, obviously, you know, Marlon and Curtis have had some, sorry, not Marlon, Liam McCracken and Curtis have had some professional fights now, but when you're all fighting amateur and there's kind of a who is the best amateur, now you're all fighting different weight classes and whatever, but do those names, does that spark like not a rivalry in the sense of you're going to be fighting them? Obviously you and George have competed before, but does it mean, or do you look around those guys and say, oh, look, this guy is maybe more adored or seen as a better amateur fighter? That's going to force me to kick on when I'm in the gym, and I'm going to try to put myself as the best UK amateur fighter.
Well, 100%. Like most of these guys, I've followed them on Instagram or just kind of watched their journey, seen them at shows. Even when I was making my debut, I think a lot of these guys were having, they're on their fourth or fifth amateur fight. And, you know, when you see guys at that level, it makes you realize, okay, that's the level I need to be at to win titles at amateur. So you push yourself to be that level. You mentioned George Staines there. He's a perfect example of what I think the beauty of amateur is he beat me in a fight. Great. I went and sparred him about 6 months later down the line. And then rewind like 3 weeks ago, me and him were sharing an apartment together in Liverpool, training at Next Generation Gym with the England squad, just making dinner together, having a laugh, mates, you know. So as much as the amateur scene is competitive, I would happily make friends and shake hands with every single one of my amateur opponents because we're all learning together in this process. So yeah, the level getting higher, that's great. We can be competitive, but also learning together to get to that top level.
That was something I was going to talk about, was the relationship with George Staines. Like, you've kind of mentioned it, but I want to give you an opportunity maybe to open up a little bit more about it. Is you've already mentioned that amateur is what it is. It's a learning experience, an experience for both fighters to take something to grow. You obviously shared the octagon with George, and it didn't go your way that day. What happens when you're in that flat, in the 6 months later, when you have the spar, when you're in Next Gen, training each other for the English nationals, when George is in there winning the Europeans, and you're in the, you can see you in the crowd with a black eye screaming for him. Like, how does that turn around from a personal perspective, right? How does that turn around?
Yeah, I think it's great. And obviously this is down the line. So me and George probably fought, it was probably 18 months ago. And then obviously at the Euros, in fact, it might have been before the Euros, I went down to spar him, and then we built a bit of a relationship at the Euros together. But I'm all for that, you know. When he was cutting weight at the Euros, spoiler alert, he did have to cut a little bit of weight. I was there holding pads for him and helping him cut weight once I'd been eliminated from the tournament. And, you know, I think that friendship between fighters once they fight is an absolutely amazing thing. And by no means are me and George best mates, but if he needs something, I will be there for him and help him prepare for any of his fights the best way I can, because there's no better person to help you than someone who's prepared to fight you, someone who has looked at you and think, how do I beat this guy? This person can help you a lot, you know? So I think, yeah, burying that hatchet with people after a fight is essential.
Again, there have been a lot of things that you've said in this that have shown wisdom beyond your 22 years, but I think that is certainly one of them that, and it leads me on to my next point about cross training, and that's the UK scene as thriving as it is. I think some of the reason it is thriving like it is not just because from a top-down perspective, all the fighters in the PFL, the UFC, the Bellators, the ones, they're all getting better technically, and guys can watch those fights and coaches can watch them and they can learn from them and take things from them. But I also think, again, from talking to a number of the amateur fighters, either that have transitioned over to pro or transitioning over to pro, all of them train together. All of them cross-train at a variety of different gyms with a variety of different disciplines, and they take certain things and they take them back to their quote-unquote home or base gym, and they're sharing that wealth of knowledge. And you just mentioned there that you were up at Next Gen sharing an apartment with George. Like, what's your opinion on cross-training specifically? Because obviously there are some stigmas there still in the UK, even though it is such a small scene, that there is a reliance and that it's almost disloyal for you to go and train at other places.
Yeah, that's it's a crazy thing that I think cross training is so good to share the skills, and it's how this sport developed in the first stages. If one person had learned all this stuff and just said, I'm not going to tell anyone else how to fight, then this sport would not have developed the way it has. And I think Dean Garnett, who's a coach at Aspire, he said if your coach discourages you from going and training other places, it means he's scared you'll realize that he's not a good coach. And I think that is one of the best things that you can say, is because if your coach is good and he looks after you and he wants your best interest, he will say, yeah, go see what you can pick up from there and bring it back to here, and then us guys can work on this, And especially sparring the same people week in, week out, you start to know each other's games. You start to know habits that they have, and it can create bad habits. So testing yourself, learning new skills from different coaches, getting different looks in sparring is amazing. And, if it just so happens that you've trained around a load of different gyms and you end up fighting someone that you've trained with, it's not that big of a deal. I think that's the only downside to it. But I've fought people that I've sparred before, and it's not a big deal.
On the topic of sparring, what's your opinion on hard sparring? Do you believe that fighters, amateur or professional, should be hard sparring? If so, what frequency do you think is right for you?
Well, if anyone knows the gym that I come from, Fourth Dimension MMA, there's Cyan Boxing who come and film our sparring sessions every now and then, and they're there to watch on YouTube. And there are some hard rounds that take place, but I think that is essential. And I think hard sparring is really important, but the frequency of hard sparring is something that should be managed. I never spar when I'm not in camp. It just so happens that I am in camp like 99% of the year. So, but whenever I get the opportunity to miss a sparring session, I take it, because my brain health is something that I'm looking to keep for the rest of my life. So, yeah, I think you need to spar hard, but when you can spar light, spar light. When you can miss a sparring session, miss it, because there's always technical stuff that you can do, or always grappling work that you can put in at 100% without a risk to your brain. So I think, yeah, everyone's shifting that way with sparring a little bit more, but it's essential to get those hard rounds in sometimes just to simulate the fight.
And that's the idea of brain health, the idea of damage is something I wanted to, and something I'm trying to ask as many fighters as I can is, obviously you think about the damage to yourself, you've sort of just alluded to that, but do you think about the damage to your opponents and your training partners? Because obviously when you're in training camp and it's hard sparring day, if you're the hammer that day, then you're going to be dealing damage out that you're not necessarily taking. And the same vein when it comes to fights. If in a fight you win that fight, you win it dominantly, and you're the hammer in that fight, you are potentially taking away lifetime and sort of the ability of your opponent's brains. What's your opinion on that?
Ultimately, in a fight, when that cage door closes, you have to have no regard for your opponent's health and almost no regard for your own health, because that's the sport that we're in. We're trying to choke someone unconscious, snap an arm, or knock them unconscious, and you have to fight until you do that. But when it comes to training, it's something I am conscious of, because if my training partner caught me with a good shot, I don't want him to follow me up and try and finish me. And if you're the kind of guy who does that, then if people rock you, they'll do the same thing to you. So you've got to look after your training partners. You've got to match the pace together. That's something that's really important. You know, if I'm sparring at 90% and my training partner's trying to spar at 30%, it's never going to end well for both of us. We're not getting what we want out of that spar. So looking after your training partners and their health's essential, because if you fucking treat your training partners like shit, trying to injure them or just be a dick when you're sparring, then soon there'll be no one left for you to train with.
Indeed. All right, so let's pivot to MMA Fight Academy. Tell me, what are your thoughts on that opportunity? How did the opportunity come about? What's the structure? Let me know what's going on.
So obviously, I'm ecstatic to have this opportunity. I'll be flying to San Diego next week to take part in MMA Fight Academy Season 1. The opportunity, it was just kind of something that we saw on the Cage Warrior social, and me and my coach put myself forward for it. The plan was always to get started with Cage Warriors in my pro career, and this is just the best way to start it, and an amazing opportunity. It's something that when we went to the trials, there were some high-level guys there. It was interesting seeing the people on the mat, listening to Graham talk about the process, and instantly I knew it was something that, A, I knew I was the right candidate for it, and B, I knew it was something that I wanted to do. So, yeah.
So what's the structure? You go to San Diego next week. What happens?
So the structure, as far as I know, don't take everything I say as 100%, because I will know a lot more when I'm out there. But we have some fighters from the Bali trials, from the London trials, and I believe San Diego trials that are all going out there to form a super team in San Diego. I think a few people will be whittled down throughout that process, but we're going to be a big team training together and trying to better each other under the coaches, Mark, Jake, and I think there will be another coach there. At the end of the process, there will be a fight show. I think maybe 2 fight shows in Bali or London, and we'll be fighting for a 5-fight contract with Cage Warriors, and some endorsement deals. And it's much more lucrative than a lot of professional contracts that you get out there at the moment. There's opportunities to be fighting in America full time if they like what they see. So it's essentially an amazing opportunity to have a big training camp, have a fight at the end, win a lucrative contract, and mix with some good level guys training with the best in San Diego. Maybe even get a suntan.
Maybe. Jesus. I mean, if nothing else, the suntan is A1 rewards. You said that you felt like you were the right candidate when you were sat on the mats in the meeting with Graham. What makes you the right candidate for that type of thing? What do you like about that?
I mean, they're looking for the next big star in MMA. They're looking for the next Paddy, the next Conor McGregor. And I'm fresh. I mean, I've had 23 amateur fights, but I'm 0-0 as a professional. I'm looking to get started with my pro career. I'm someone who's always looked to train out and about and gain knowledge from other places. And I think I've got a different personality and a different look to what a lot of people are seeing. And I think that's something that can be pushed. And I know that I'm going to go and grasp this opportunity with both hands. So I think that's all that they can ask for.
Beautiful. Look, well, I will leave it there. Before we end, if you could shout out any sponsors, any gyms, any training partners, any social medias, anything you want to shout out, the time is yours. Please go ahead.
This is where I always forget to shout out someone and leave someone upset. But yeah, I want to thank everyone that I train with at Fourth Dimension, Squad Jiu-Jitsu, Hardy Wallhead. Yeah, I've got a great team behind me. Everyone that I train with when I go and cross-train at Next Gen, the England squad, all those people, I appreciate it. And then obviously all my sponsors. Like I touched on, I've been fighting as a professional throughout my whole amateur career, and that's because I've had some sponsors who've helped fund me and mean that I can cut down on work. So I'm in a fortunate position where I've been able to personal train and then just live off sponsorship money. So I want to shout out to my sponsors: Mortgage First, Later Living Now, The Mortgage Man Wales, Next Generation Estate Planning, Sure Financial Solutions, Official 411. I think that's it. Natalie Ellis, mortgage broker. And perhaps there's someone else, but that's it. Whoever sponsors me, you know that I appreciate it. So that's it.
Fantastic. And if you could just shout out the socials as well, please.
Yeah, so my Instagram is at Teddy Stringer. The Twitter is the same. And then my Facebook is Teddy Adlington Stringer. And I think I've even got a TikTok as well, which is Teddy Stringer 1. So follow me on all that stuff.
Beautiful. Well, look, best of skill in San Diego. I'd love to have a chat
very much.
in San Diego. That would be great. And yeah, best of luck with it all. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, man.